Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of This is Tech Talks, and I'm your host with our guest today, Corbin, and my co-host Lars. Hey everyone, how are you?
Hey, hey.
Hi.
Yeah. Uh, Corbin, how are you? We heard that you are not feeling well today, but how are you right now?
I'm doing okay. Just
Yeah,
apologies if I like have to like cough off to the side or something like that because I've got a
no
little bit of
problem.
a throat thing going on.
No problem at all. Take care. Hey, how are you, Lars? How was your day?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to hear about this book series by Corbin.
Same here. I mean, I'm really excited. We'll talk a lot about the book as well as what it is going to be covered and how you can buy it. So yeah, that's a surprise, I would say. So let's not talk about it at right now. So let's start. So Corbin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Corbin. I'm a full stack developer, although in recent years I've been primarily a front end developer. And I collect retro video games. I hang out with people, do open source, and I'm writing a book called, well, three books called the Framework Field Guide Trilogy.
Nice. So Corbin, first question: what is this book all about? So what you mean by framework field guide?
So, most like books or courses or whatnot will teach you React, maybe Angular, maybe a little bit of Vue, something like that. I'm aiming to teach all three at the same time. So I call it the Framework Field Guide because it teaches React, Angular, and Vue, and kind of takes you from introductory, like what is a component, and then the first book focuses on the fundamentals, right? So like the core set of APIs, I think, and then the second book is more the ecosystem. So like Next.js, some of the community that revolves around these tools, and then the final book is internals, which is like really in depth rewriting React, Angular, and Vue from scratch, parts of it, anyways. And yeah, so I'm trying to make it as accessible as possible for anyone that is either knows an existing framework, or maybe is wanting to learn any of the frameworks. Yeah, so that's what the book series is about.
So, last, you want to ask anything?
Yeah, well, I can spoil and say that I have read some of the early draft of the first book, and I
Mhm.
have been learning Vue through this book. So I personally can recommend it a lot. Like, even if you're already experienced in some of the other frameworks, you can still learn another framework because you can see the code from the different frameworks side by side using really pretty simple examples. So that has been a good experience for me personally with this book series.
Nice, nice. Okay, so Arvind, as you said, you are going to actually teach multiple frameworks, React, Vue, and Angular. So why you decided to actually choose these three specific frameworks?
So part of it is because it's like a little bit of what I know. Like I haven't used Felt quite as much as these three frameworks. But then the other part of it is that I think that these three make up the widest amount of usage within the framework ecosystem for front end, right? Like yes, I could have talked about jQuery, but like I feel like modern development tends to focus around one of these three frameworks more often than not. But it's just one of those things where it's like when talking about component based architecture, React, Angular, and Vue tend to be the three biggest players in the room.
So, um, why you decided to write this book? I mean, what was your motivation behind it?
Yeah. So I am I have a bit of a like spotted history in terms of like education, right? Like I didn't quite complete high school in the same way that most people did. I tested out, and then On top of that, I didn't really get the opportunity to finish college. Like there was just some challenges with scheduling and whatnot. And I found it really challenging to not only learn programming, but also to find a job in the field, right? Like I got very fortunate to be able to land the opportunities that I had. And I want to be able to help other people who are in a similar situation. And I want to be able to help them learn whichever like course or work they want to learn. And this is, I feel like, the best core strength that I have, that I can be able to communicate and help other people learn as well, which kind of dives a little bit into the pricing of the book as well.
This is nice. Last anything you want to ask? All right.
Yeah, just the kindred spirits. Like I mean, not in terms of like education. Well, I dropped out of high school a few times, but eventually made it. And but yeah, I'm contributing to free learning resources for the same reason. That's how I got a lot of knowledge about the ever evolving JavaScript ecosystem and frameworks in particular, and I wanted to contribute back and keep that cycle going and enabling people, no matter their skill level, no matter their location in the world or their income, to learn some of the tools of our trade, right?
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, we know Lars is also writing a book series on NX DevTools. So in case you want to try it out, just reach out to Lars or just check out his Twitter handle. You will find the link to the book, so you can also get it for free. Great. So, Corbin, who is your target audience here? I mean, you're trying to teach multiple frameworks, as Lars already mentioned that he's trying to learn Vue, and he would totally relate. But who is actually your like target audience for this book?
So I think that there are a few different targeted audiences depending on like which book you're reading. So keep in mind, I'm still focusing on the first book for now, but I am planning on having this be 3 books in the end. And then, it depends on who, like what you're wanting to learn, right? If you just want to stay within like one framework, then I think that like the first book is going to be for more introductory audiences. The middle book is going to be for kind of intermediate, getting up to scale with making production applications. And then the third book is going to be for really advanced, like need to know how the framework works internally code, right? But if you're wanting to learn a framework outside of what your kind of comfort wheelhouse is, right? You can take the first book even, and like Lars is doing. Like I consider Lars one of the like great experts of Angular in my opinion, right? And he's been a huge help with actually reviewing things and pointing out, hey, there are different ways of doing things. Like what if we did this way or whatnot? So again, thank you, Lars, for that. You've been an immense help with the book process. But I think that it's really reassuring to know that Lars is able to learn Vue from this book without kind of falling asleep at the wheel, because, like I know that a lot of what's in this first book is likely recap for him, but being able to see the different syntaxes between the frameworks is hopefully helpful.
As you said, so you are going to have multiple cities. So in this book, how actually you have structured your current book right now?
So I actually have a generalized outline that covers everything from like derived values, so like memoization a little bit, or computed values in Angular or Vue, and then pipes in Angular, all the way into like what is unidirectionality, how do you structure an application, some generalized things like that. But then like what is a lifecycle method. Here, I can actually pull up the outline that I have.
No, nice.
Is it okay if I share my screen, or would you rather?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. So here, let me do this. Okay. So, yeah, we can see that so far what I've written is about 14 chapters.
Can you zoom in a bit?
Yeah. Sorry.
Or not? Thanks.
Perfect.
Yep. So I've written about 14 chapters so far. I'm planning about 17 chapters, 17 or 18. And you can see that we go all the way from dynamic HTML, like starting with like super fundamentals of like what is a component, how does it work, into lifecycle methods, derived values, forms, into like component reference, so, like the use ref hook in React, and then being able to switch between the three frameworks using these little handy dandy tabs. So yeah, trying to make it as straightforward as possible to learn any other frameworks as you want to. And then even getting into dependency injection, which was a fun chapter to write in Angular, because obviously there's a lot of things going on within Angular. So yeah.
Was that a fish pizza?
It was a fish pizza, yeah. So these images are not final. These are kind of what I have there currently. But yes, there is fish and pizza at a buffet table. I'm using an analogy here of like, having a buffet of data that the user or the component can go grab data from or food from. Is kind of the analogy I have for dependency injection.
Nice.
The images here are not pretty, but some of the images earlier on are a lot nicer. So.
And that was inspired by an AI generated image, right?
Yeah. So Lars had access to Dolly, and he shared a generation with me, and I was like, "Oh, that's great! I should try to base something off of that." So Dolly's actually been a bit of a help with the book.
Nice.
So.
So last, actually, as you are already reviewing this book, what you liked about this book, and we'll talk about this as well. I mean, how can we become part of this book as this enterprise model? So.
Yeah, so my impression is that it goes very much step by step, at least in the early chapters. So it's building small pieces of knowledge on top of the other, one step at a time. So you will definitely not, based on what I've read, be overwhelmed with a lot of information, a lot of concepts to consume at the same time. So it's taking it very slow, at least in the beginning. I don't know if the speed picks up later in the first book or what. I'm sure you can answer that, Corbin. But that's the impression I have. And as I mentioned earlier, I was happy that even I could learn something. I mean, there wasn't any Angular learnings in there, and not even React. But yeah, I learned a lot about Vue because I haven't looked a lot into that, and there's been a lot of updates on Vue 3 since I looked into it a few years back. So I was happy to be able to refresh my whatever little knowledge I have and learn something new from this book.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ross. So, Corbin, we heard that this book is going to be paid. Is that true?
No, in fact, there's a word that's right behind you in the background. So the Framework Field Guide series, all 3 books are going to be 100% free. You won't need an account to download them or buy them. You won't need there will be a paid version that I'm going to be trying to release that will likely be paid, but whatever profits I make from that, the physical edition, will be going to charity of some kind. I've yet to figure out which charity, but it'll likely be some organization that helps youth learn programming.
Nice.
So yeah, trying to help out the community as best I can and make it a useful resource for those that can't afford, because some of the courses out there are really good, but some of them can be quite expensive, not to name names because I actually like a lot of the very expensive resources and I think they make sense in a corporate environment. But I think that there's a bit of frustration when trying to get into an industry and seeing a price tag of a couple $100s, so it can be challenging to get into the industry at times.
So, as Lars mentioned, he's already reviewing the book. So, how does that work? I mean, can anyone be the reviewer of the book, or is it like on special invitation, or you are looking for some kind of skill sets? So yeah.
Yeah, so there is a bit of a special invitation process, and it literally is just reaching out to me. So I have a community called Unicorn Utterances, and if you are in our Discord, so I will share a link in our private chat that then be shared through here. So we have a Unicorn Utterances, and then if you have a Discord, then you can join our Discord community. And if you join our Discord community and let us know that you're interested in the book, I will be happy to share it with you early. And then all I ask is that I get any amount of feedback. That would be super, super helpful in helping refine and polish the book as much as possible. Yeah, outside of that, that's about it.
Last, anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, I'm casually part of the Unicorn Utterances community, and something that we haven't discussed yet is that Corbin is doing a lot of live streaming and live coding on Twitch, and if you join there, you're guaranteed to have a good time. It goes off the rails all the time, and it's a lot of fun, and you have a bunch of Twitch plugins that we can play around with and make funny memes and things like that, and meet new people both in the Twitch and in your Discord server. And yeah, it's a very kind community you have going there, and you help out. You have these, what do you call them, office hours?
Mm-hmm.
And what remind me, what's the purpose? What's going on in the Unicorn Utterances office hours?
So during office hours, we just try to help anyone that has any questions that may not be possible to answer via text. So we try to do as much as we can in a voice call where we answer questions, we pair code, we kind of hang out and chill, kind of anything in between. So it's a cool, I like to think that it's a cool environment to be able to chat and get help with programming questions if you need them.
Yep. So, probably this question is going to be a little bit different, and I think it will be really useful for many of learners who are like planning to learn different frameworks. So, while writing this book, of course, you have done a lot of research. So, what do you think is the differences or similarities between all these three frameworks? So, would you like to explain in detail?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest differences is actually, I had mentioned dependency injection a little earlier. That was a huge difference between the three frameworks, especially Angular. Angular has a lot of different APIs to deal with dependency injection, and they're very powerful, and they've changed a lot within the past few years with like Ivy in particular. So it's been really interesting to see like how injectable is used within Angular and how it differs from like the use context method in React, right? Or derived values is pretty different between them. Even like React has the use memo and Vue has computed, right? Life cycles is another huge one. React has a pretty huge divergence from Vue, right? And Angular. Both of them use mounted lifecycle methods and unmounted lifecycle methods and something pretty similar to one another. And then React has the effect, right? So talking about side effects and why side effects are useful in applications was part of that chapter and was very useful. So, yeah.
So, I mean, so here, I just want to understand. I mean, whenever we talk about dependency injection, we say, okay, it's a unique feature which Angular has. But as you were saying that there are something similar which exists in other frameworks. This is what you're trying to teach in this chapter?
Yeah, so I think that for the most part, there are pretty similar APIs between all three frameworks, right? Like at least enough to be able to write a book that kind of outlines the generalized APIs, right? And yes, there are differences within them, and there are nuances where one is better than the other for specific instances, or maybe you have preferences towards the way that maybe React does effects or whatnot. But they all share a lot of the same DNA in terms of how they run under the hood, right? Like they have incremental updates from one another. This isn't to say that they aren't different and that they're not useful in different scenarios, just that they have different views on the same image, right? Like an analogy I used, I was recently on the WebRush podcast, and the analogy I used in that podcast was like, if you're looking at a sculpture, right, and you look at it from one perspective forever, then you're only going to get to see part of the sculpture, right? Like you're not going to fully understand the problem space. You're not going to fully understand the nuances of the sculpture, right? But if you look at it from multiple different angles, you can see and understand that sculpture with more nuance. You can like really dive in and fully comprehend what's going on. So that's what I'm trying to do with this book series, is that I'm trying to be able to help provide 3 different ways of looking at something fairly similar to one another.
Interesting.
That reminds me of that story about, what was it, engineers inspecting an elephant, and one went to the trunk and said it's what was it, like it's a hose or a snake, and one went to the tail, it's a rope, and one went to, I don't remember what, but the feet or something. But basically, they all came back with different answers. What is it? Because they only inspected a small part of the big animal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty similar to your analogy, that it's this huge ecosystem, and if you're only looking at in one place, you're not getting the full perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just to ask, Corbin, I mean, I saw there is a last chapter called directives. If I understand correctly, directives do exist in Angular, probably Vue, but how about React? I mean, do we have concept of directives?
Yeah, so great question. And this is where things get tricky with writing about all 3 frameworks at the same time, is that there's not always a perfect equivalency in those APIs, right? So in the directives chapter, I actually can show what I'm doing with Vue really quick. Hang on. So with React, I actually am using a ref pattern to be able to have attributes that you can assign directly to an element, right? So we can use like, let's see if we can look at our buttons, right? So we can use lifecycle methods to be able to focus the button as soon as the button becomes present, using a use state and a use effect. Now there's some nuances here. You might not want to use a use effect for this particular example, but like you can style the background of a button, right? Again, you might want to use CSS for this, but as a simple example of what an attribute is, we can have a use style background hook, which then exposes a ref, and then we can assign that ref to a button, and then that acts almost like a directive. It's not quite there, but it's similar enough that I feel comfortable exposing it, right? As opposed to Angular, which actually has a proper attribute that you can then gain access to via something similar to a HTML attribute.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was a new learning for me. I know we discussed this. I asked a lot about how do you create attribute directives, how do you create structural directives with React, and yeah, you have great examples and good explanations of how to make similar things with React.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the React ecosystem tends to prefer, like, I've heard discussions about like, oh, we want to add attributes, but we just haven't been convinced that they're useful, right? So it's interesting to see how the different ecosystems kind of solve these different problems in different ways, right? Like one of the things that Vue doesn't have that Angular does have is this concept of a structural directive, right? Or this ability to like conditionally render based on a template. And Vue can do some of the things kind of similarly, but in the end they're fairly different. So like in that chapter, one of the things that I do is I write a what's it called, a feature flag implementation, right, where you want to render a specific part of the code using feature flags. Well, in Angular, that's actually quite straightforward. You can create a structural directive, which then checks that for a Boolean value, and then if that Boolean value is true or false, then it's just star feature flag, and it'll hide it or show it conditionally based on that value, right? But in Angular or in React, you have to build a hook, and that hook has to have like some different logic in it. So it's really interesting to see how each framework kind of tackles the same problems in different ways.
Interesting. So I just want to understand one more thing. I mean, I'm of course, right now really excited about this. So what about effects, right? So in React, you have use effect hooks, but in Angular, we never do that. So what do you think? I mean, what is this similar of like use effects in Angular?
So even though we don't have use effects, we do have side effects as a concept, right? So what I try to do when I'm teaching these concepts is I want to try to explain why we have a use effect, or what use effect is really doing behind the scenes, right? So even though I do talk about use effect, I start by talking about side effects in general, ignoring these frameworks, right? What is a side effect and how does it apply to common code bases in general, right? So I would argue that use effects usefulness is dealing with side effects, right? And you want to, within a framework, contain your side effects within a confined environment so that they're not kind of all over the place and causing mutations and causing headaches, right? So the way that I think a use effect is similar within these other frameworks is lifecycle methods, right? So like one of the side effects that I had kept in mind is like adding an event listener for resizing the window size, right? Like when you resize the window, go get the width and the height and then assign it to a variable. So using Angular, you might have an add event listener within the ng on init, and then in the ng on destroy, you would have the remove event listener, right? Meanwhile, in React, you would have a use effect, and in that use effect with no dependencies, you would have an add effect and a remove effect, right? But those are fundamentally doing the same thing of adding and cleaning up side effects from a component instance.
Last, do you want to ask anything? Because I have a lot of questions. Nothing? Yeah. So I want to ask about content projection. I know in Angular it's a little bit different. How does it work in React and
Content projection?
Yep.
So it's really interesting. React actually has a pretty powerful content projection API. Obviously, you have the ability to do children, right? So like in Vue, you would have slots, or in Angular, you have ng content, right? In React, you have the children property, right? So when you pass down components, you have this special attribute called children that's passed down to a component, right? But the really powerful part is because JSX is assigned to a value, you can create a variable and just assign it to some JSX values, which then create element commands within React. What you can do is you can just call that children value anything. You can have left sidebar, right sidebar, and pass in JSX there as well, which kind of acts like name slots. Or you can even do some really interesting, powerful things like you can map over each of the children elements and pass it a value using React's.children API. So a lot of really powerful things you can do with React's content projection.
Interesting. So the next question is again, I mean, a very powerful API. I know in Angular, I love working with forms. What about the other frameworks? Do they have like their own built-in thing, or how do they manage the forms?
So you can build forms without any form of external libraries within React and Vue. The challenge is that there is nothing quite the same as Angular's forms. Angular's forms are really, really powerful. And the challenge is that in order to build an application, you have to have some example of forms, right? So within the forms chapter in the framework field guide, the first book anyways, I am using a library for Vue and React. But I'm using it as a supplementary, like, here's what these other frameworks do that Angular has built into the box, right? and as an expansion of like how you manage forms in a more fundamental way, or more maintainable way, I guess I should say. So I think the ones that I went for in React was Formic, very
Mhm.
popular library, very widely used. And then inside of Vue, I used vValidate, which seemed the most similar to Formic.
Last, you have any questions or you want to ask me?
Yeah, I was just reminded about. Do you have any chapters on state management? Because now we said Angular has forms. It even has two forms APIs, and the other ones don't have that built in to the same extent. But when it comes to state, there is a lot more in the core frameworks when it comes to React and Vue, and Angular sort of largely leaves it up to the developer on choosing how to implement state with a lot of different options available and no one way.
Well, it's interesting because even React doesn't have an official global API, right? Like they have context, yes, but like it's nothing quite the same as say Redux, right? Redux is kind of the version of the global state that would be used in an enterprise application. Meanwhile, Vue has both Vuex and Pina, which are from the official maintainers, but is maybe not part of the core framework, right? So this is where the second book comes into play. The second book will talk about routing, it'll talk about global state management, it'll talk about network requests. Some of those things are built into Angular, but I feel are more ecosystem than they are the core framework, right? Like even RxJS. I love RxJS, but I feel like far too often when trying to learn Angular itself, you're trying to learn both Angular and RxJS, and it's a little overwhelming. At least it was for me. So at least in the first framework field guide, I try to use RxJS as little as possible, which I realize is going to be somewhat of a controversial opinion within some Angular developers. And it's understandable. Like while writing one of the chapters recently, and Lars was reviewing it, I wrote some code samples that I was like, "Oh, here's a solution without RxJS," and the code was long and it was buggy and it was frustrating and it caused headaches. And Lars was like, "You can just use RxJS, right? Like this solves so many problems for you right out of the box." And I'm like, "Yes, but it's the principle of the thing." um, no, but really, I think that it is helpful to learn the core APIs first and then learn the ecosystem stuff second, because both are very valuable, but they're, I think that one builds on top of the other, right? So it's helpful to keep that in mind.
Yeah, what I had in mind was that Angular doesn't have fine-grained reactive primitives or anything like that, while React has use state. Angular doesn't have anything like that. It has either you have mutable properties and some ng-zone magic combined with change detection, or you have to reach for RxJS and learn that. And just use state, that hook is a lot easier to learn and a lot more useful for a lot of especially local UI state concerns. But even just in itself, you can do a lot of good with use state and use effect without an additional library.
Right. And that's definitely been a challenge is finding the edges of what is and isn't possible within each of these frameworks, right? Obviously, RxJS is a huge boon to development, right? Like, I don't think anyone on the Angular side would disagree that RxJS is helpful. But it is a challenge to try to learn RxJS alongside the same time as some of the core like OOP patterns that are present within Angular.
So my next question is actually about RxJS. So are you planning to cover like RxJS with all these frameworks? Because if I'm not wrong, I mean, React developers have also started using RxJS a lot. I mean, Ben has been working on React ecosystem now. So I think that is actually adding to the popularity. But I'm not sure about Vue because I have not seen people or not seen so many developers talking about RxJS in Vue, but I have seen some libraries, some helper libraries which exist. So are you planning to cover that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be helpful to explain when RxJS is particularly useful, like when you're dealing with events, right? So like let's say that you're trying to do a replay system where you want to record when the user is clicking on things and you want to be able to replay those. RxJS would be a huge advantage over, say, views primitives for reactivity, right? Or even just trying to introduce a primitive reactivity system, to Lars's point, within Angular is a huge advantage. So there's definitely going to be some talks about RxJS with the other frameworks, not just Angular.
So, when you are actually planning to launch the first book, what is the plan?
Sorry. Yeah, so I'm going to be launching the first book, hopefully, really fingers crossed. Don't keep me to deadline here. But I'm really aiming for sometime around March. I'm getting close to finishing the first draft of the book. So I'm hoping that I can edit it and release it by then.
So, are there going to be like multiple ways you are going to, or multiple formats this book will be available, or it will be just online?
So it'll be online. You can
Mhm.
also download an EPUB. Like even right now, you can go download an EPUB if you're part of the early access group. In fact, I believe that's Lars's preferred way of reading, which is part of why I implemented that feature. And then on top of that, I'm also going to be adding in support for like Kindles. So like it'll hopefully be on the Kindle store and a few other of the e-publishing platforms. And then I'd like to be able to make it available for purchase. I don't know through which retailers yet, though, for a physical copy.
Nice. That's your target.
Yeah, it's great that you offer different formats, and I have no doubt that the online version is the superior version. But I just happen to enjoy reading in an air-gapped tablet. It's only 7 inches, but just going out in the garden, in the sunbed, or on the beach and bringing that tablet with me, but no internet access, no distractions, no notifications. That's just the most enjoyable. And even on a small screen like mine, it's a 7 inch, very poor Android tablet. The reading experience is still pretty good. Like in the online version, you've shown us when you shared the screen, you can click the tabs, switch between React, Angular, Vue. In the book version or EPUB version, they come one after another, right? It goes. I don't remember the order, but it goes something like React, Angular, Vue, or something. So you have to, if you want to compare them, you have to like switch, like scroll back and forth or whatever, turn the pages, whatever you're doing. But that's okay. It's yeah, it's not too bad. You're again you're introducing just one step at a time, so I don't get lost in that going back and forward. So that has been quite a nice experience. And also, even though it's not the I think you will make improvements to the EPUB format at some point. It's just to get it out there and to get it in the hands of me, because I prefer EPUB. So yeah, it's already pretty good in that format. So the end result is going to be great, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a hope, and I definitely appreciate you helping getting it to that point of being super polished.
Corbin, next question is a little bit complicated question, I would say. So you research through all these three frameworks. What is one feature which you think the framework should borrow from each other?
Ooh, what's one feature that each? Oh, that's such a good question. Um, I would love to see Angular and React take on the ability to use state outside of a component like Vue can. Vue, you can have code that is reactive, not just within a component, but globally as well. And I've heard, aka I've seen on Twitter, that some of the Angular people are working on something similar, where you can have state that is outside of a component but still re-renders a component, which would be really powerful. I haven't heard anything like that from React, and I don't know how React would do that, to be honest. I think that would be really helpful, really useful. And then I can't think of anything in particular that React could do very easily to be able to add in new APIs. But actually, I would love to see, and I don't know how React would do this, but I would love to see the ability to use hooks conditionally like you can within Vue. Very helpful. Very, very helpful when building applications. Just reduces the mental overhead a little bit. So, and then let me think. For Vue, so that's React and Angular, what I'd love to see there. Vue. Vue definitely, I would love to see more work on their directives. Their directives feel a little bit more like an afterthought currently, as opposed to more of a fleshed out system. And I would love to see the templating system from Angular find its way into Vue a little bit more. Because it's a very, very powerful system within Angular that you can build super cool APIs with. And I think that's the biggest missing piece from Vue.
I think this is probably last question from my side, but what are the learnings you had while writing this book and which you want to actually share with other probably the writers or someone who wants to write?
I would recommend to take it slow and to be comfortable with taking it slow. Like you're not going to get a book done in a weekend. And I know that sounds obvious, right? But I remember when I started it January, I was like, oh, December, easy. I got this book done by December, easy. No problem. I can write that fast. And it's a huge difference from writing short-term content, right, like a blog post, to writing a book or even a trilogy of books, right? Like there's such a different way that you have to approach thinking about things and organizing and structuring and like I cannot tell you how many times I've moved chapters up and down and sideways and left and right, and I've had to reorganize the book 30 times, and then I had to rewrite the intro and the outro. So I would recommend just being comfortable with keeping it slow, and that it'll be okay as an end result to make it slower, to make it more polished.
I mean, of course, I'm someone who can never write a book. I tried it, gave up, never gonna try again.
What about you, Chris?
Well, I have a final question as well. Could you tell us about some choices you had to make so far while writing this book series? What were some major choices or forks in the road?
Yeah, so that's been a big one with this series in particular. So when I started writing the book, I used Angular Vue's options API, and then I made a tweet to Evan Yu, and I was like, "Hey, this feels wrong. Like I'm being told that I should write something else. There's a lot of different ways to write Vue code. Which one should I use?" And he was pretty clear. He was like, "Hey, you should use the setup API." I was like, "Okay, I just now have to rewrite every code sample in the entire book now. That's fine." But it's for the better. I think that API is definitely the way forward. It's a much more modern API. It's a nicer DX. And then in Angular, as I was writing the book, the setup, the standalone APIs came out. So now we got to go rewrite all that. And then the inject function came out as I was writing the book, which has been awesome in Angular. React hasn't changed too much, although I say that, but the use effect has changed within my time of writing the book, and I've had to make some changes there as well. So really, it's been a fun adventure in how many times can you rewrite chapters because of different changes.
No impact by React version 18 yet?
Well, that was what I was talking about. Is React 18 introduces a use effect that it runs twice instead of once. So now I have to figure out how to explain that.
Yeah, the choice of Vue, the composition API instead of the options API. Yeah, I'm biased, you know that, but I found it. I read the book first, or the first part of it, when you were using the options API, and I was expecting the composition API because I know there was these two, and the options API feels like a 10-year-old framework. It doesn't feel, you use the word modern. I would definitely agree. Like the composition API feels a lot more modern and more smooth to an experienced JavaScript developer. So yeah, that was definitely a good choice. And the same with standalone components and other APIs with Angular. That makes it easier to teach and to learn the framework. And on top of that, you have, once you read the books, now you're out there, you know the most modern API. And there, of course, there will be a lot of legacy code bases using the older or more traditional styles, but eventually they will fade out to a certain degree.
Yeah. Yep.
So what would you like? I was imagining myself as a new developer, and I would, knowing that these two are available and what's the impact of that and what's out there, I would definitely prefer to learn the modern choice. That would be the best investment for me as a developer going into a JavaScript career.
Totally.
This is last question from my side, Corbin. So anything you want to promote on this apart from your book for sure?
No, just my book, framework.guide or frameworkguide.com. And then we're going to be launching it on Unicorn Utterances. And yeah, if you join our Discord, I'll send you an early access. So if you go to framework.guide, it'll actually redirect you to the Unicorn Utterances website. And we have at the top of the website, we have the Discord logo that you can click on to join us. So yeah, I hope to see you there. And if you don't want early access and you want to wait until it's published, I totally understand that too. There's a sign up page at framework.guide as well.
That's anything you want to add?
No, thank you so much for coming, Corbin, and congratulations on joining WebRush as well. That was great.
Yeah, that was
I look
awesome.
forward
Thank
to
you.
listening.
So thanks, Corbin, again for your time. Thanks, Lars, for joining and sharing your knowledge. And thanks everyone who joined online. And do get the access to the book in case you want to actually try it out or you want to wait. Just subscribe for it. Whenever it is ready, you will get notification. So yeah, that's it for the day. And we don't have anything planned for next week as of now, but we will figure something out and we'll announce the next episode. So thanks again, everyone. See you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.